Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. Let me get my slides up here. And hello, everybody from uh, sunny Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to an antidote to busyness lessons in intentional productivity. Now, I study the science of personal productivity for a living, and we're going to explore some of the fascinating science behind how our attention works, how we can better focus in this environment that we're in today. With the goal of respecting your time and leaning more towards the practical, tactical side today, there are a few topics that we'll chat about. We'll start with a new definition of productivity. I think what comes to the mind of a lot of people when they hear the term personal productivity, there's room to explore that topic. Then we'll dig into the takeaways, becoming more intentional and productive, getting our brain to focus, our stubborn brain to focus often, and some techniques for generating new ideas as well. There is one thing that I want to mention off the bat, though. If I've learned one thing in exploring this topic of personal productivity, it's that it's personal. We're all wired differently. We all do different work. Some of us are team leaders. Some of us are individual contributors. Some of us do complex work. Some of our work is simple. We all are different, and we're in different environments too. And so one thing that I'd encourage you to approach this session with the mindset of is taking the advice that works for you and leaving the rest. Not all of it will work, right? It's not supposed to, but I've chosen the ideas that I'll share today with the intention of helping you move your work, and I think these techniques work for our lives as well, forward. All right, so let's dig in, as promised, to a new definition of productivity. And this is worth doing because of a lot of the preconceptions and the preconceived notions that people have when it comes to this term productivity, where, we hear this word and we think often of something that's so cold and corporate and all about efficiency and boiling our life down to a spreadsheet. But I don't think productivity is for that. I think productivity is so that we can do more work that we're proud of, so that we can manifest our values through our actions each and every day. So that we can do work that's meaningful, but also make a difference through what we do. And, sure enough, efficiency is what comes to the mind of a lot of people. But I don't necessarily think this definition works across different contexts. Let's say, for example, that you wanted to become the world's most efficient Twitter user. So you follow 1 billion people, catch up with every new news story that's been going on, probably develop a bit of anxiety in the process, which is definitely pervading its way through modern society. But we can entirely be efficient about the wrong things. Same is true if you wanted to become the world's most efficient Twitter user or email user, rather. The average email is opened within 6 seconds of it being received. That's a quite responsive way of working. But it just shows that just because we're efficient, we can be efficient on the wrong things and not be productive in the process. So maybe efficiency isn't the best possible definition here. What about getting more done? This does come a bit closer. But then we have the days where we are merely busy, but not necessarily productive. Maybe your day looks something like you catch up with 200 emails that have been building up, maybe most of which are from Amazon, that things have been ordered and that they have shipped and that they are out for delivery and that they have been delivered. Maybe it's different there in the US, but I seem to get a lot of emails from Amazon. Maybe you have 4 pointless, unavoidable meetings on this particular day. Maybe you stay on top of your social media updates and you catch up with every new news story that's been going on around the world, because we all know there is a lot to follow that distracts our attention throughout the day. Essentially, we are busy, but not necessarily productive. And I think this speaks to a fundamental truth of productivity where it doesn't matter how busy we are if we don't have much to show for that busyness, right? Busyness is often no different from an active, maybe sometimes hyperactive form of laziness when it doesn't lead us to accomplish things or move things forward. Now, we all do have days where we have to play the role of use the analogy you want, the traffic cop, the air traffic controller, the firefighter, but getting more done, especially when it's mere busyness, is not necessarily a prescription for productivity. All right. So maybe those don't work incredibly well. What about getting more important stuff done? This definition, I think, does come closer than others, but it doesn't work, maybe 5% of the time. That time is when we don't want to accomplish anything of importance, when we don't want to produce anything of importance. And of course, what we produce is the root of productivity. And some days, for our longer term productivity, and especially in terms of recharging, the most important thing we can do is not important at all. Maybe someday, maybe this weekend, you're taking off to, I'm just imagining this is Belize or some beautiful tropical destination. And maybe your intention that day is to enjoy a lovely book on the beach and maybe with a pina colada, one, of course, for each hand, right? And maybe doing so allows you to recharge for later on. So you have more energy for what is in front of you, so that you have more energy and mental capacity to make a difference and again create work that you are proud of. In the modern work environments that we find ourselves in, I don't think any of these definitions really cut it anymore. Not efficiency, not getting more done, not getting more important stuff done. The best definition that I have found for personal productivity, and it is one that informs the work that I do today, is accomplishing what we intend to do. It's not about how much we produce, right? It's not about how busy we are. It's about what we accomplish. And what do we accomplish but the things that we set out to do in the first place, our intentions. In other words, if you intend to have a relaxing day on the beach and then you do, I would argue that you're perfectly productive. And the same is true if you intend to have that traffic cop type day and then you do, I would argue that you're perfectly productive then too. I'm going to redo my slides here because I noticed that my video, oh, there we go. Now we are back in business. And share. All right. Hello, everybody. It's good to be back. I don't know why my video froze. But this idea of productivity being about intentionality and intentionality being core to what productivity means, this lives at the heart of the book that Mr. Michael Levy was plugging off the bat. And of course, we're giving away 100 copies of that today. But this also forms the foundation upon which I have built this session for you today, an antidote to busyness, lessons in intentional productivity. So with this definition in mind, I've chosen a couple of different strategies that I think you will find helpful. The first is my all-time favorite productivity ritual, and it happens to be a daily intention-setting ritual. And the second is a little deep dive. That's a bit contradictory, is it? A little deep dive. We'll do a deep dive into the science surrounding our attention. And you might be surprised by the way our mind works when it comes to distraction. But let's start with what we are productive on in the first place, because before we focus on anything or hyper-focus on anything, as the book is called, we need things to be productive on in the first place. And how do we choose those besides what is provided to us? We all have different levels of autonomy in our roles, but where we do have the autonomy, that choice that precedes our actions becomes key. Now, over the last decade or so, I've experimented with probably any productivity system you can think of, as you would probably hope, because that's kind of my jam. And what I found was that none of them actually made me deeply care about what I had to get done, you know. But then a rule came along, one of the simplest rules of all, that completely changed that idea. That rule is called the rule of three. Now, before I share it, our mind is a fascinating, weird place, full of dependencies, full of limits. And one of the natural limits of our mind is called our working memory capacity. Now, I won't nerd out too much, but where this is relevant is our working memory capacity determines how many things we can keep in our mind at one time. We used to think the number was 7, 8, 9 pieces of information long, but the latest research shows that it's around 3. This is a common capacity that most of us share. And we could look no further than to the culture that surrounds us to see that examples of this abound. We have sayings like, good things come in threes, right? Good things are happening all the time, thankfully. But we chunk them together into threes. We have sayings like celebrities die in threes, and the third time is the charm, and the good, the bad, the ugly, and blood, sweat, and tears, because we remember and internalize things involving threes. Even a story, a sequence of thousands of events that happen one after the next, we divide into 3 parts: the beginning, the middle, and the end. The Olympics, the pinnacle of human athletic achievement. We award 3 medals: gold, silver, and bronze. And even growing up, we're immersed in stories: the 3 little bears, the 3 blind mice, the 3 little pigs, the 3 musketeers. The list goes on, but the rule of 3, this magical number 3, fits with how we think. And it goes like this. The rule goes like this. At the start of the day, you fast forward to the end of the day in your head and you ask yourself, by the time that this day is done, what 3 main things will I want to have accomplished? Right? By the time this day is done, what 3 main things will I want to have accomplished? One of the simplest productivity rules. And if you love the rule as much as I do, you might find the inclination to do the same every week. And the power of this rule lies not in just mapping on top of how we think, right? It also maps on top of whatever productivity system we happen to be using already. If you keep a to-do list, it works in conjunction with that. If you use an app, there are a lot of great apps out there for managing the things we have to get done. It works in conjunction with that too. It's a great rule, but if we did 3 things all day, every day, let's be honest, we probably wouldn't have a job after much of a period of time. But that's the idea behind it. Is it eliminates your job? No, I'm just kidding. That's the idea behind it. You can only choose 3, so they have to be the most integral to your day, the things that will actually allow you to make progress. And because it fits with how you think, you're more likely to remember them. So it's always easiest to illustrate this stuff with an example. On the day that I made these slides, my 3 intentions: number 1, create a fun and hopefully helpful session for you all. Number 2, clear my email inbox. Number 3, finish a draft of a book chapter. But this works across contexts and teams as well. I originally learned about this rule from a man named J.D. Meyer. He is Microsoft's director of business something or other. And he used the rule with his team. I think his organization was comprised of 100 or 200 people, because he didn't want to hear a laundry list of things that everybody was working on, but he was willing to listen to 3 compelling outcomes. So the simple question he asked people is, okay, what 3 things are you working on this week? And before they knew it, They needed to have an answer to that question because he was sure to ask. So simple rule, but it scales across teams. And it also lets us stay agile, right? We all have to stay responsive to the demands of our job. But some days we start the day with 3 emergencies and a new one erupts, and then it allows us to weigh the relative importance of all 3. Works across our personal lives too. So 3 personal intentions today. Number 1, go on a 30-minute nature walk. Number 2, spend some disconnected time with the wifey. And number 3, only check the news 3 times. Now, there's a lot going on in the world right now, and the news is a fascinating place, But something else that's fascinating when it comes to the rule of 3, when it comes to, productivity in general, and this most definitely obscures the pride that we can feel with our work, is it's almost impossible, to become more productive without becoming hard on ourselves in the process. Because the very idea that we wish to become more productive implies on some level that we're not entirely satisfied with where we're at already. And so productivity is it's fun to talk about, but it's important to pair strategies like the rule of 3, like these ideas involving an attention that I'll share shortly, with some ideas for self-kindness, because we need to counterbalance that tendency. But it also lets us more easily integrate these habits into our life. The rule of 3 is a great example of this. One way, don't expect to accomplish all 3. This is a fascinating thing because when we start doing a ritual like the rule of 3, another reason this ritual is so powerful is it lets us cultivate an awareness about our capacity for daily and weekly accomplishment. I think about my own work in this example. At the start, when I was first starting out with the rule of 3, I would set an intention to say, write 500 words, and I'd end up writing 1,000. And so the next day would come along and I would think, wow, yesterday went so beautifully. I'm going to set an intention to write 2,000 words today. And again, I would write 1,000. And, I'm a slow learner, so it takes me longer than most. But, eventually I settled into a rhythm and an understanding that I had a capacity for daily writing of about 1,000 words. And we all settle into a similar rhythm with regard to how much time we have, how much attention we have, how much energy we have. We can accommodate for those characteristics in the intentions that we set, so we don't need to kind of bully ourselves into becoming more productive. Another one, be patient as you settle into the important things. There's a phenomenon called attention residue, which is a term coined by researcher Sophie Leroy, which states that we can't simply transition from one thing to another cleanly in our mind. There is always a part of our mind that is remembering and holding fragments of what we were just doing, right? This is why you're in a meeting and then you try to answer email and you can't really answer email as if you're focused on it because a part of your working memory is recalling the meeting, right? Settling into important tasks, be patient with yourself as you do so. If you're feeling anxious these days, again, the news is a great example of that. It's worth doing simpler things to warm up, but the news is worth coming back to as well. It's more stressful than we think it is. And so aligning our work around our daily news consumption, simply because it's such a primary source of stress in what we do, is a remarkable strategy for self-kindness, because the news affects our focus and our productivity more than we might think. Not to veer too off track here, actually, I think we're pretty much on track. But one study that I encountered a little while back that I just needed to include in here involved the 2013 Boston marathon bombings, the tragic events that took place that day. And a team of researchers looked at two groups of people. The first group of people watched 6 or more hours of news coverage about the Boston Marathon bombings. And the second group of people were runners in the actual marathon. And what the team of researchers found was that those who watched 6 or more hours of news coverage about the bombings were more likely to develop PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, than somebody who was in the marathon and personally affected by it. Yeah. This is prime example of how the news affects our mind, how it affects our focus. Because the more stress we experience, the closer we get to burning out. And burnout, research shows, is the exact opposite of engagement. Right? The less stressed we are, the more engaged we become with what's in front of us. And the news happens to be one of the most stressful elements of our day. So scheduling that news time, using the news as a big heavy quotes here as a reward, very helpful strategies for kindness to ourselves as we work, which is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated productivity strategies out there. All right. That's the first idea that I wanted to share with you. Simple one, but it's one that I know you will find powerful in practice. Again, take what works for you, leave the rest. But of all the ideas out there, the rule of 3 is one of the stickiest that I've found. It sticks with the most people. So there's also that saying, intentions are great, intentions are beautiful, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And sure enough, when we have this intention to focus on something, so often our mind wanders, our mind gets distracted, or we get interrupted. And something that I noticed a few years ago that set me on another research journey is that my life had essentially become a series of screens. And this is something that more of us are realizing, especially since March of 2020, when our daily screen time has increased to today to 13 and a half hours, right? That's a great proportion of the day, especially considering the average American sleeps or is awake for 16 to 17 hours each and every day. And sure enough, as the day went on, there were many screens that I tended to. It started with my phone, which would wake me up in the morning. Then it was time to fire up YouTube, and I'd watch an episode of Hot Ones, one of the pieces of great content on that platform, where they ask famous people interesting questions when they feed them unusually spicy wings. It's great entertainment. Then it was time to do work. And so, of course, I would turn to my laptop. And then all the meanwhile, throughout the day, these 13 and a half hours looking at various screens, a smartwatch on my wrist was beeping and buzzing and vibrating and distracting. But of these things, I found I was able to use the iPad, my computer, the watch with a good amount of intentionality. But there was one particular offender that I wasted an inordinate amount of time on, and you might be in this same boat. That was my smartphone. But not only this, I found that I was losing control of my behavior when I was on this device. I would want to use it less, but yet I couldn't help but use it. I would want to read a book, but I found that I didn't have the attention for it, right? And noticing things like this got me inspired to conduct a little productivity experiment of sorts, to use this device, what is an ungodly small amount of time by my standards at the time, which was 30 minutes each and every day. This was the amount of time I had to phone family, to tend to group chats, to have conference calls at the time. And I'm going to be honest with you. The first week of this experiment, it felt like hell. My mind would always think about pulling this thing out of my pocket. I'd feel these phantom vibrations at the time. But after a week, I found that my mind had a chance to actually settle. And at the time, I noticed three things beginning to happen. The first of which, my attention span grew quite considerably. I could focus with relative ease on whatever was in front of me in the moment. But not only that, I had more ideas rise to the surface of my mind, just automatically. And all the meanwhile, I had more plans for the future as well. More focus, more ideas, more plans. Now, why? Why would this be the case? That was the question that I found myself asking at the time. And I did what any hopefully self-respecting productivity person would do who writes about this stuff for a living. I dove head deep into the research surrounding attention management, poured over thousands of research articles related to this topic, accumulated over 25,000 words of just pure research notes on why this would be the case. Now, let's cover each of these in turn, starting with attention span, because our attention span is far, far shorter than we think it to be. There was one study that I still remember the shock in encountering this today, because it was published in a great research journal, and I was excited to dig into it, just how long our attention span is. And what researcher Gloria Mark found was that when we're doing work in front of our computer, on average, we focus on one thing for just 40 seconds before we switch to doing something else. Now, I have to be honest with you. When I encountered this study, I didn't believe it. I thought there's no way this could be true. And so I flew out to meet with Gloria, who works at Stanford as well as Microsoft Research, to see how she conducts her experiments, to see how she conducted this one. And what she does, she doesn't just look at a mouse in a maze or something and see that it changes directions every 40 seconds. She trains cameras on people as they work, with their permission, of course, and looks at how often they switch between not the different applications that they're using, but the different projects that they're working on. On average, we switch every 40 seconds. And by the way, that lowers to 35 seconds when we work with IM open at the same time. But the problem is not what we think it to be. We think the problem is that our brains are distracted. This is a problem, but it's merely a symptom of the real, actual problem, which runs far, far more deeply than this. Sure, our brains are distracted, but on a chemical level, our brains actually crave distraction in the first place. But not only this, my friends, our brains reward us for seeking out and then finding distraction. We evolve to perceive threats in our environment, and so we're constantly on the lookout for things that are novel. And sure enough, there is a novelty bias embedded within the logical center of our brain's prefrontal cortex, by which for every new and novel thing we direct our attention at, our mind rewards us with a hit of dopamine, the neurochemical that is correlated with the anticipation of pleasure. It's the pleasure-seeking chemical. It's what motivates us to seek and then find distraction. But because we have grown into these patterns of tending to distraction throughout the day, right? We stay at this high level of stimulation where there's an awful lot of dopamine coursing through our brain. Every 40 seconds, in fact, we get another hit, right? Begins when we wake up often. And this is something I noticed in myself at the time. I'd wake myself up with my phone, and then I would see that 4 notifications came in overnight. I would check for text messages. Then 40 seconds after that, maybe check Instagram. 40 seconds after that, I would check the news to get another hit of stress and get a bit closer to burnout and anxiety. We're at this high level of stimulation throughout the day. So how do we lower our height of stimulation? Here's the fascinating thing that I was surprised to find. There is a name for the feeling that we experience when we go from a state of high stimulation down into a state of low stimulation. That feeling is called boredom. Now, we don't have to make ourselves bored. There are ways around this, but at the time I thought, okay, I need to experiment with boredom, right? To get my mind down into that new lower level of stimulation. So I did another productivity experiment with an N of 1, where I purposely made myself bored for an hour a day for a month. So day 1, I read the iTunes terms and conditions. I put a call out to the readers of my website at the time, and I asked them, okay, what's the most boring thing that you can think of doing? Because I'm going to make myself bored for an hour a day for a month. This was my favorite thing that somebody suggested, reading the iTunes terms and conditions. Actually more readable than you might think, although I don't recommend it. I definitely don't recommend it. Day 4, I waited on hold with Air Canada's baggage claims department. Day 19, I counted the zeros in the first 10,000 digits of pi. Day 23, I read Wikipedia articles related to rope. Day 24, I watched a clock. I chose one with a second hand because I knew that would be that much more engaging, and 26 other activities on this particular month. Again, it took about a week. But once this week went by, I noticed the same thing. My attention span grew. I could focus on things not just 40 seconds anymore, but for a few minutes and then quite a bit longer. I had more ideas and more plans once more. Now, we've covered attention span. Let's dig into a bit of the science of creativity, because this was one of the more surprising findings that I uncovered in this deep dive into the research. Let's cover the ideas and the plans. Now, one of my favorite quotes is from J.R.R. Tolkien. And he has written that not all those who wander are lost. And I love this quote for life in general, but I also love this quote for its applicability to the science of the wandering mind. Our mind is built to wander. In fact, on any given day, your mind will wander for about 47% of the time. Yeah, some of this is to the cringeworthy past, but most of it is to remarkable places. And in fact, if you think to when your best, most brilliant ideas have occurred to you, you probably weren't focused on much. Maybe you were taking a shower, and then out of the mist, your mind had a chance to connect a few of the constellations of ideas that were swirling around inside of it. Right? We can enter into this mode deliberately. And the less stimulated our mind is, the more calm our mind is, the more fruitful and the more happier this mode makes us. These techniques work in tandem with one another. And because deliberate mind wandering is kind of a mouthful, I affectionately refer to this mode of deliberately letting our mind wander as scatter focus, right? Where we just let our mind be and see where it goes. And the research shows that because of where our mind wanders to, we unearth ideas and plans we would never have arrived at otherwise. Another fascinating bit of research, if you will permit some geekery or nerdery, relates to just where our mind wanders to. And the research shows that we do wander to the past around 12% of the time. But it also suggests that much of this time we're recalling ideas from our past. You know, we just seem to remember the cringeworthy things that we said. We have memories of those mind wandering episodes because they are the most novel. But the rest of the time, and about half of the past wandering time, is remarkably, remarkably fruitful for our creativity as well as for our productivity. 28% of the time, our mind is wandering to think about the present. Right. A good example of this is, you're typing up an email. It's important. It's maybe political, or it involves a lot of people. And so you can't figure out a way to phrase it. So you walk to maybe a coffee shop nearby if you're working from home, maybe the other side of the house, and pick yourself up a nice cup of coffee. But on the way, you get stopped in your tracks. An idea hits you, and you unearth an insight about how you should phrase that email. You sprint back from the door of the house to write it, and then you come up with that insight idea. But here's the thing. Our mind wanders to the future more than the past and the present combined. 48% of the time, we're planning, we're thinking, we're ideating. And my video is frozen. I'll fix it in a second. But because our mind wanders to the future so often, we actually think about our goals 14 times as often when our mind is wandering versus when we're focused. This is so common that researchers refer to this as our mind's prospective bias, right? And when we bounce between all three mental temporal destinations, we unearth ideas that we would never arrived at otherwise, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful slide and a beautiful mode that we think in. The past to the present to the future to the present to the past, bouncing between all three, we unearth ideas we would never arrive at otherwise. Now, if you're good with math, you probably notice these numbers don't add up to 100, and it's because the rest of the time our mind is dull, it's blank, or it's thinking about an idea that isn't rooted in time. But whatever it is for you, maybe it's taking a shower and having a set of Aqua Notes, which is a waterproof notepad that lets us capture ideas as they arise, right? Maybe it's waiting in line and just waiting in line. See what arises to the surface of our mind. This becomes easier as we settle our mind. Maybe it's listening to music, soaking in an album we haven't heard in a decade or two. Maybe it's cooking a meal, right? Whatever it is for you, I think scatter focus is critical for modern day productivity, where one brilliant insight can change the trajectory of the projects we lead, of our own career, of the things we choose to take on. In this way, we have this common narrative that we need to fit more in. We don't. We already fit in so much in our schedule. We need more space around the things we already try to fit in. One other topic in addition to productivity that I'm a bit of a geek about is traffic flow. So how traffic flows down a highway. And the research shows that what allows traffic to move forward isn't how fast the cars are moving, as you would expect. Rather, it's how much space exists between the cars that allows traffic to move forward, right? Our work and our life are the exact same way. We don't always have total autonomy. We don't always have total control. But if creativity matters in what you do, you need more scatter focus time, and you'll consider your goals, your intentions more often as a result, right? We also think of distraction as the enemy of focus. Overstimulation is the enemy of focus. The calmer our mind, the clearer we think, the more deliberately we work, the more productive we become. So how do we get there? I have a challenge for you. Again, take what works for you and leave the rest. But if ideas matter to you, if you find you don't have the attention that you used to, maybe to read a book, maybe to call a friend, maybe to just hang out with other people without picking up a phone. Stimulation is the thing to tame. And so it's a 2-week challenge. It takes our mind about 8 days to settle into a new lower level of stimulation. This is why our vacations need to be about 8 days for optimal effect and for best productivity after. Probably shorter than a lot of our vacations, including mine. But that 2-week challenge is to limit unnecessary screen time, to ratchet that down from 13 and a half hours to a necessary amount, right? If possible, boredom is something to find. Many of us, have situations where we can't, and that's fine. It's possible with that stimulation fast to limit unnecessary screen time and find that lower stimulation level. Connecting with the analog. What's an instrument you haven't picked up in a while? What's a DIY project around the house? Where's some exercise around town? Maybe take up meditation, a shortcut to calmer mind. Some physical project. I know I'm assembling some stairs after the talk, which I'm excited by. This is an internal solution, right? But we also have this environment that we find ourselves inside of. And so with an eye on the clock, I'll go through some tactics rapid fire here for email and our phone. These are sources of chronic stress too, which again leads to burnout. So the more chronic stress we have, especially hidden forms like our phone and like email, like instant messages, the more engaged we become, because engagement, again, opposite of burnout. Email. All right. First idea, VIP email alerts. Not all senders are created equal. And so by training your email client, which ones you want to receive notifications for, pretty much every email client has a VIP email alert feature. You can respect your attention throughout the day and not lose track of anything important. Second idea, message sprints. We all have 2 types of work we do. We have focused work, we have collaborative work. We all have a different proportion of each. And email, instant messages are a necessary byproduct of doing work that is collaborative. And so message sprints, where we set a timer for 10, for 15, for 20 minutes at the top of an hour and blow through as many messages as we possibly humanly can. It's a simple tactic. It's one of the best that I have found, not only for getting back to people quickly, because if you do this at the top of every hour, people have to wait 45 minutes, maybe tops, for a response. But we also have focus time with that as well. We can manage our day a bit more deliberately. Final one, the 5-sentence rule. This is a rule where you put a little note in your email signature that says something along the lines of, to respect your time and mine, I keep every email I send to 5 sentences or less. Simple, effective, great cue to pick up the phone or walk over to somebody to deepen your relationship with them if you feel the need to write something longer. One of my favorite email rules. Phone. One of my favorite modes on the phone is called grayscale mode. This disables all of the color psychology that different applications use to hijack our attention throughout the day. And it also makes your phone screen look something like this. It turns your phone screen black and white, which is surprisingly helpful. I find I spend about half of the amount of time that I usually spend on the device, and I just enable it when I want to order Uber Eats. Second idea, notice how apps make you feel. Because what stimulates our mind does not necessarily make us happy. Sometimes the things that we tend to, on autopilot mode, on our phone or on our computer, as we're listening to somebody in a meeting or a talk like this one, often they make us less happy than we think. We gravitate to what's stimulating because of the dopamine, but we don't want our productivity, of course, to suffer. Final one. My favorite, all-time favorite subscription service is an analog one. And that tends to the third tactic here for our phone: consume more physical long-form media. I have one source of news right now. It's a source that refreshes once a day. It's more of a briefing than something that I have to wade through. It's called a newspaper. You've probably heard of it. I love it, and I don't check any news digitally. The more of our consumption we move into the physical world, the less stimulated our mind will become, and the calmer we will become too. So this dive, pardon me, into the science of attention, it taught me a lot. But maybe the lesson that resounds through today is that above any tactical thing, above any fascinating bit of research, it's that the state of our attention is what determines the state of our lives. If we're distracted in each moment, if our mind is so stimulated, we're going to have trouble focusing. But if we make that active effort to calm our mind, to become less stimulated, we'll have the focus, we'll have the productivity, we'll have the creativity, and combined with other strategies for productivity, we'll have the intentionality. So thank you so much for coming to the webinar today. An antidote to busyness. Hey, Michael, lessons in intentional productivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We've had some questions.
Sorry about my video there too. I don't know what happened.
You came across fantastically, I think. Of course, nobody on this telephone call was doing anything but paying full and 100% attention. Did not pick up their apps, didn't look at their stock ticker. I did notice that if you turn your stock ticker from grayscale, you feel much better, particularly on days like last week where it just looks great or looks the same. So we've got some questions, and I want to get to those. I want to remind everybody again that we'll be sending a follow-up email to collect address information. Please complete that in order to get a copy of Chris's book. I think that from our standpoint, selfishly, if I can make one comment, the nature of the distraction is an interesting variable on the total outcome, and that is, what are you distracted by? Are we distracted by the latest and greatest of our executive leadership and use and application of resources to fight each other over, did somebody take the wrong pieces of paper home? Irrespective of whether it's right or wrong, we won't get into that, but oh my gosh, to be dominated by that versus some of the things that we're doing with our clients, and that is the device is all powerful. It is omnipresent. It is not going anywhere. It is a source of truth. It is certainly one of the biggest sources of distraction. But one of the distractions that one could consider from a sort of corporate workplace perspective is you should be distracted by some positive things said about you or your peers.
Mhm.
You should be distracted by some positive accomplishments by team members or the company at large. If you do not distract them with that, don't worry, they'll get distracted by something else. But
Yeah.
that produces no value or upside, for the business. What are you distracting people with? Anyway, so WorkProud, that's our space and world of like, let's build programs where some of that distraction can be positive and around people's workplace productivity outcomes. All right, let's get to some of the questions.
Yeah, and by the way, on that point, this is not to bash on interruption unnecessarily, because interruptions are a necessary byproduct of doing work that's collaborative. If if somebody's launching a rocket and being distracted, people don't have noise canceling headphones on at NASA, when they're doing work that is considered by researchers to be hyper collaborative, right? Interruptions are a necessary byproduct, and when they produce those results in the long run, they can be, like you say, even more rewarding.
Yeah, indeed. Some of it is the nature of the beast. All right, so some questions that came in. Kimberly Sherlock, Marriott Blake, thanks for the question. Wanted to ask, what strategy can you suggest for team leaders to help team members, those that you supervise, to improve their productivity? How do you apply these principles in a traditional team construct?
Yeah. Well, the rule of three, I chatted a bit about this. Asking people, what three things are you working on this week, this month? And also, what three things do we want to accomplish as a team? If you're looking to rally people around certain objectives, it's an incredible, powerful way, because people will actually remember and internalize those outcomes. Another thing is working with those on your team so that they can discover what the most important activities they could possibly work on a daily basis are. What one activity for that, and this gives people remarkable clarity when you and the folks that report to you are in sync with regard to what activities on the day-to-day are the most important. One activity on a personal level that is also worth going through as a team, and again, there aren't just three, but this is a way to find the most important things, is make a list, or I'll speak to this strategy on a personal level, but this works in conjunction with somebody too. Make a list of every single activity you do over the course of a month. Get it all out of your head onto a sheet of paper. You can do a Word document if you want. And then, print it off and ask yourself, if you can only do one thing on that list day in, day out, every single day, which one of the things on your list of activities delivers the most value to what your team is structured to accomplish? Then you get a second one, thankfully. So you can circle a second one and a third one. But here's the thing, and this varies, it doesn't vary depending on industry, depending on role. After about 3, 4, or 5 activities, our marginal productivity begins to fall off a cliff, and everything left on the list, most of everything, either supports our work or gets in the way of our work or takes time away from what is most truly important. So having that North Star, or the 3 to 5 North Stars, is incredibly powerful for syncing everybody up and moving forward in a way that is producing value.
Great response, Chris. We are at the hour, and I don't want to.
Oh no.
Yep, I don't want to hold up people. I want to, again, on behalf of all the attendees and the folks at WorkProud, thank you, Chris, for bringing this information together and for writing the book. Chris's contact information is there. For the other questions that I had from Caroline, Susan, Victoria, Laura, I'm going to work with Chris to get a response to those. And we will, as I mentioned, send out information about Chris's book and how to get a copy of it, as well as the WorkProud study. Appreciate everybody and your interest and attention. If there's any particular things you'd like us to discuss or consider for future webinars or topic, please don't hesitate to email us at info@workproud.com. Otherwise, I wish you all a great week, and hopefully we can all apply some of Chris's principles in our personal and professional worlds. All the best. Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.